Hello and welcome to this first meeting of the Budget Committee for the 2026 town budget. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hazlitt Thiel and Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. And Council, we have no consent items, public or confidential. We have a staff report on the 2026 budget forecast by staff. And if we give our attention to John Vanderheiden, he'll be happy to walk us through staff's view of the needs for the budget of 2026.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. All right, I think we're good to go. All right, thank you for the opportunity to address the Budget Committee this evening. Council just approved the 2024 audited financial statements a few weeks ago, and we are in the middle of 2025, and now we're already talking about 2026. So today's presentation on the 2026 budget forecast won't be long. However, there are a number of key items that we'd like to bring to the Budget Committee's attention as we head into the 2026 budget process. So we'll start with looking at the 2026 forecasted increase. This is the operating budget increase, including some key preliminary assumptions that we have included. I'll spend a few minutes on our 10-year capital forecast. We'll take a look at the council's strategic plan and how that is incorporated into the budget process. I'll also run through some key budget principles that we use here at the town each year, just as a reminder for council and for the public. And then I have a couple of simple slides on inflation, and then we'll finish with an overview of our budget process and key items in our timeline. So to begin with our 2026 forecasted operating increase, this is the budget driver chart that we show you each year as part of the budget process. And I know that it has a lot of numbers on it, but it does do a good job of highlighting some of the key drivers that do have an impact on the town's operating budget and ultimately how much residents will pay in taxes. We start building each year's chart based off of the forecasted amount from the previous year's budget and then update it for things that we know about. So to begin, our first driver is entitled Inflationary Impacts, and this is where we incorporate the impacts of inflation on both our costs and on our revenues. The town's single largest expense in our operating budget is for personnel costs, and so our updated figures here include increases for negotiated and expected labor contracts. And just for a little bit of extra detail, some of the other items that we've included in here are higher Sun Life benefit premiums that we have, WSIB costs, and the inflationary pressures that we experience on materials, supplies, and contracted services. The next line is entitled Capital and Growth, and each year we have operating impacts due to new growth, as well as the impacts due to capital projects that have an operating component. So for both 2025 and 2026, this has been a significant driver as we have new costs to operate the community center and library at 16 Mile. We also have operating costs for both transit expansion buses and higher reserve transfers for our electric buses, as well as operating costs to maintain new roads, parks, trails, and subdivisions. The third line here is entitled Council Strategic Priorities. And this line refers to some of the business cases that were identified in the 2025 budget process that related to supporting Council's strat plan. As not all of those items could be accommodated in the 2025 budget, a number were deferred to 2026. So those business cases will be reviewed again to ensure that the various initiatives are prioritized. Our fourth line down is entitled Annualization of Items Approved in Prior Years. And what this refers to is the remaining impacts of items that we added in 2025's budget. So just as a reminder, some of the items that we add in a budget in 1 year are not fully realized in that year, and so the remaining impact has to be pushed out to the next year. If you think of the example of adding a position, if that position starts on July 1st, you only have 6 months in one budget year, and then you have the remaining 6 months to be added in the next budget year. In our 2025 budget, there were a number of positions that were added to both maintain the same level of service and to address some corporate objectives, and this figure represents the remaining impact of those additions. Our fifth line down is called Oakville Public Library, and the figure listed here represents their forecasted tax levy impact. And it also includes the remaining budgeted impact for the opening of 16 Mile. Our sixth line down, if you're still following along on the list here, is entitled Prior Year's Assessment Growth. And it's actually a negative figure. And this indicates that it's additional revenue that's coming into the budget to help reduce the tax levy. Growth in our assessment never perfectly matches our growth in costs, but we do, as much as possible, try to match them to avoid fluctuations in our tax levy. So in previous years, we have had extra growth that was not needed, and therefore we've set this aside or saved it for when we knew there would be operating impacts, specifically the opening of the new community center at 16 Mile. And this helps to soften the blow of adding all the new operating costs of a new community center in 1 year. And then finally, the last item on this section of the chart is entitled Capital Levy. And this is part of our capital levy at 1%, which we have consistently had for many years and is vital to supporting our asset management plan to ensure that we have a reliable funding source for all of our infrastructure renewal projects. Now, I'd like to say a couple of words just about assessment growth and assessment in general before we leave this slide. So assessment growth is reflects the additional properties that are added to the tax roll, which were not included in the prior year's budget. So this is a regular budget driver that we have here at the town, though the amount of growth does fluctuate depending on what we receive from MPAC. And as you can see on the chart here, this number is listed as a negative, which means that it reduces the overall tax levy impact for existing residents. We've currently set it at 1.5%. Historically, we've typically used 1%. However, in recent years, we've seen increased growth in the town's assessment. And as any investment advisor will tell you, past performance is not indicative of future performance. We do feel that this is an appropriate number to be using for this year. And as we work through the budget process and continue to receive updates from MPAC, we'll update Budget Committee and this figure accordingly. Before I leave the discussion on assessment growth, I wanted to point out one other thing. The province has continued to delay their reassessment. We're still working with values based on the 2016 reassessment the province did. So if and when the province does do a reassessment of properties, this does not result in true assessment growth to the municipality. Rather, it just changes how we split the proverbial pie amongst residents. So I only point this out as there's a common misconception out there that when provincial reassessment happens, there will be millions in new taxes for a municipality, but that's not actually true. So I just thought while we're talking about it, I'd touch on that a little bit. So once we factored in assessment growth, we get to the total town number, and then we also add in the numbers that we have from the region and from the province for education, and that brings us to the forecasted total you see right now, which is just under 4%. And one other item I would like to point out about this 3.97% that's on screen, that does include the $600,000 in savings that council built into the budget last year and asked staff to look for in 25 and in 26. Staff have been tackling a number of initiatives, including reviewing areas of budget efficiency, looking at any positions that have been gapped, and reviewing lean initiatives. And more information about this will be included in the commissioner presentations in the fall. And it is our hope that we'll be able to achieve 50% of the target in the 2026 budget, with the remainder to be found in the 2027 budget. All right, so this slide is entitled Path to 3.5%. So included on today's agenda is a draft direction from the mayor asking staff to prepare the budget with an overall increase of 3.5%. And as you saw in the previous slide, we're sitting just under 4%. And while this includes some deferred business cases from last year, new business cases have also been identified by staff to address needs and key priorities. So taking into account these pressures, the town will need to remove about $3 million from the operating budget to achieve the target. Now, in early conversations with the mayor, CAO, and treasurer, a few areas of focus have been developed, and I've listed them here on this slide. So as we do every year, finance will work closely with our departments to ensure that the overall increase for each program area is in line with the direction and is reasonable and appropriate. Second, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we'll continue to work with MPAC to refine our growth figure and compare that to the ongoing growth pressures that we have. The third item is for penalties and interest. And our penalties and interest revenue has increased significantly the past couple of years. And this is a budgeted revenue source, and we may be able to increase that more than our typical trend has been. The next item down is for fuel rates. With the removal of the carbon tax, fuel rates have decreased, and we'll be determining the impact that this has on our projected fuel costs, which should represent a savings to the town. The fifth item is for gapping. And as you might remember from our quarterly reports, the town's gapping has increased significantly following the pandemic due to changes in the labor market. In previous budgets, we've increased our gapping allowance, and our gapping allowance is basically a recovery we build into the budget for positions that will be vacant during the year or unfilled during the year. And while the difference between our budgeted and actual gapping has shrunk, we will take a look at this again and see if this is an area that we can find any more savings. And then finally, we will be, as part of the budget process, looking at any of the business cases that come forward to prioritize the one that best supports the best. Let me try that again. To prioritize the ones, not just one. Hopefully it's more than one. To prioritize the ones that best support council's strategic plan. All right, those are my notes for the operating budget. I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes talking about the capital budget as well. So every year the town prepares a 10-year capital forecast as part of our budget process. And this provides a look ahead to the upcoming projects that we expect to undertake. This is a critical part of long-range financial planning, as we need to know what both our objectives are and our pressures are so we can make appropriate decisions for the benefit of the town for the long term. This involves looking at the amounts, timing, and operational impacts of the various projects that come up. One key item to assist us in doing this is our asset management plan. The asset management team works closely with the line departments and with finance to ensure that the infrastructure renewal projects are based on the principles that we lay out in our asset management plan. And so these are the sorts of infrastructure renewal projects like replacing roads or HVAC units and vehicle and equipment replacements. Another key variable that we have in our capital budget is related to the impacts of growth. Oakville is a growing municipality and we need to add projects, things like new community centers and fire halls, as well as road widening projects, to ensure that our residents are provided with the services that we offer. Including projects in the forecast is based off of our DC study, which is in turn driven by our master plans. In the past 2 years, Council has approved both the Fire Master Plan and the Parks, Recreation, and Library Master Plan, and components of those plans will be included in the 10-year capital forecast. Finally, any other requests, which we call program initiatives, are evaluated and prioritized based on Council's strat plan and other corporate priorities. All of these various capital projects are also considered against the funding sources that are available to pay for them, so we ensure that we are using the town's financial resources appropriately. Now, before I leave this slide, I'd also like to point out that tariffs will likely have an impact on some areas of our capital forecast. The exact impact of the tariffs is actually quite challenging to quantify based on the nature of the tariffs, the fact that they've been changing, and it also depends on the timing and nature of our own capital projects themselves. AMO has done some work in analyzing the impact of tariffs on municipalities. They've ballparked the overall amount at about 2% of an impact. However, the estimated impacts do vary significantly depending on the industry and the capital project in question. So we'll continue to monitor the situation and reflect any significant fluctuations in our staff prepared budget. All right, moving from capital to the strategic plan. On these last couple of slides, I have mentioned Council's strategic plan, and that is an important consideration that we have as we build our budget each year. The budget book itself is grouped or aligned with the key areas of focus that you see on screen, and the consideration of the objectives and action items in the strategic plan are important in building the budget. As we go through the budget process, we, as staff, consider the various components of Council's strategic plan and how to incorporate them into the budget, keeping in mind the overall direction on any tax increase. So this includes items like the Downtown Cultural Hub, incorporating the Parks, Rec, Library Master Plan, the IDEA Plan, work on stormwater, and cybersecurity. And I shared those examples not as an exhaustive list, but those are some of the items that I know are important to you as Council. When we get to our Commissioner presentations in the fall, there will be a lot more detail to consider on these different components of the strategic plan. I do have one slide here that outlines some of the key principles and policies that we follow here at the town to ensure financial sustainability. They're all listed in the staff report, so I won't spend too much time on them here. But I do want to highlight that they involve us considering the long-term impact of our projects and initiatives and considering what those impacts are on current and on future budgets. I did mention I had 2 slides on inflation. The current economic situation does impact our approach to budgeting and the pressures we experience, especially on the capital budget. And as I'm sure you're all aware, inflation has been on a bit of a roller coaster the past couple of years. And that's the dotted line you see on the chart in front of you is the inflation line that we've been experiencing. It spiked high in 2022, but it has been decreasing since then. While we're glad that it is now returning to the figures we were more accustomed to seeing from the 2010s, there is still uncertainty being seen in the current core inflation figures, which recently came in at over 3%. I'd also like to point out that this chart shows the town's overall tax bill increase in blue. And so as you can see, we've historically stayed quite close to inflation, albeit with a bit of a lag at times, usually a year or 2 behind. And so if I move to the next chart, you'll see that we've added 2 colored lines. The red one is to indicate where we are currently sitting, and the green one is based upon the mayor's direction. In both situations, the forecasted tax increase drops from 2025, mirroring the inflation line from a couple of years ago. I'll also add that this slide has the inflation from the Bank of Canada projected at 2%. However, the Bank of Canada has actually put out 2 different scenarios, one based on 2%, the other based on 2.7%, depending on the nature of tariffs. And I think I just wanted to share that to underscore the point that tariffs do create uncertainty in our current economic situation. All right, that brings me to the budget process itself here at the town of Oakville. The process that we've outlined here in Appendix A is similar to the one we've used for the past couple of years under strong mayor powers. This chart here is a rather simplistic process timeline that we're hoping to follow this year, subject to the direction we receive. And I'll walk you through some of the key items that we've got here, paying special attention to the components of public consultation. Those are the items with the gold border. As we know, that public consultation through the budget process is important to council. So we'll start at the top left and work our way across. So June 16th, that's today. This is the external budget kickoff. Staff are already busy working on the budget internally, but this represents the start of our external process with council and the public. Going from June 17th to September 24th, this is where the budget committee can hear from residents about their thoughts on the budget. As you can see, this is a gold bordered item, so it involves that public consultation I was just talking about. On September 25th, we'll have a meeting of the budget committee where the budget committee can receive and share any information from its members that they have heard while engaging with residents. And that will lead us into October 21 and 23. At these 2 meetings, staff will present a staff draft budget to the budget committee based on the mayor's direction. The presentations on these days will include the regular budget overview, as well as the commissioner presentations. Then if we jump down a row, we'll move to October 24th to November 26th. And once again, the budget committee has the opportunity to again consult with their residents, this time on the staff prepared budget. The next item we have is a green bordered one, and it's the week of November 3rd. And this is something that we added last year, and it seemed to work quite well. During this week, we are hoping to provide the opportunity for you as councillors to come to Town Hall to meet with members of our senior leadership team to ask any budget-related questions that you may have once you've had time to digest all of the information in the budget book and in the commissioner presentations. We do know it's a lot of information to throw at you in a short amount of time. You will, of course, have the opportunity to ask questions at any public meeting as well, but we wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to be well informed as council as you consult with residents on the details within the budget book. And that leads us to some special meetings we have to receive delegations from the public. They are on November 11th and November 13th. And so similar to prior years, this is where the public can come and delegate on any topic related to the budget. And it's also an opportunity for you as budget committee members to ask any additional questions of staff. And I should mention that we'll have one of these meetings during the day and one during the evening to maximize the opportunities for members of the public to come out. Given that November 11th is Remembrance Day, that meeting will be in the evening, not during the day. And the November 13th one will be during the day. And that leads us to the final Budget Committee meeting on November 27th. And that is where, as staff, we will be able to provide any responses to questions we've received from you as Budget Committee. And it will also be your opportunity to give any recommendations to the mayor for his budget. And so that leads us to the last row on the chart, which shows the start of the mayor's budget, which starts the proverbial clock under strong mayor powers. On December 4th, there'll be a special council meeting where the budget will be formally presented by the mayor to council and to the public, and it will also include the town's rates and fees. On December 11th, we'll also have the opportunity to receive public delegations on the mayor's proposed budget. And then on December 15th, council will officially consider the proposed 2026 budget. And I would like to note that this is technically less than the 30 days that is under the legislation. However, just like last year, we will have a motion prepared for council should council wish to wrap up that part of the budget process at that time. And speaking of strong mayors, I did put on the slideshow Appendix B from the staff report as well. This is the budget decision flowchart that is to help council and the public as we navigate through the budget process under the directions from the province. It's the same information as we've used the last couple of years, and should we end up in a situation where we have amendments and vetoes, we will work with the town solicitor and the town clerk to ensure that we are following all those correct procedures. And with that, Mayor Burton, I would be happy to take any questions there might be.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we have any. Councilor Elgar.
Mayor Burton, thanks. Thank you. Through you and Jonathan, thanks very much for the presentation. One thing I'm wondering, maybe we've missed out as a council, is determining what we are subsidizing different programs that we're not allowed to make more money. And I noted the region in the last budget, I think between health and social services, we're up to 16.8 million where the current people are subsidizing what was not the agreement with the province, where like for the Ministry of Health, it was supposed to be a 75-25%, and we're not nearly that. That's cost us another just 11.5, and it goes on between the paramedics, senior services, and employment and social services. Fast forward, now we get to development charges. In 2025, they said it was going to be 15.5 million. Guess what? Bill 23 comes, throw another 5 million at it, so we're at 20.5. So you add up the whole thing, we're sitting at 37.3 million that we, the taxpayers of Halton Region, are paying in excess of what we should be paying. You know, at the town of Oakville, is it possible we can get something similar? We can show a line of what we are doing and subsidizing? Never mind, you know, year over year, but just exactly what the numbers would be. It'd be so helpful to tell the people what's really going on.
Through you, Mayor Burton. So in response to your question, Councillor Elgar, we can certainly provide information, especially when we come back with the full budget overview of what I'm going to say are the costs of growth. It's a little harder to put it into one line, for example, on the tax bill, based on the nature of when these exemptions come forward and which developments they're on. It's not as easy to do that, but we can certainly give like a 5-year history of how much those exemptions have been for the town of Oakville, and then you can see that cost.
So we would know what the actual DCs, what we subsidize annually in the budget? That's what I'm looking for, something similar to what the region has done.
Yes, through you, Mayor Burton. So we can certainly have the number of the projects that have come forward that have exemptions on them. We can certainly pull that together. And I think we normally give a reserve report when we bring forward our budget documentation, and we can include that in there as well.
Because I think the general public would really like to know that. I know when we say, oh, we're going to have down to a 3.5% budget increase, perhaps we wouldn't need any increase if in fact we didn't have all these exemptions that we were forced to provide. So I look forward to that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Anybody else? All right, Councillor Elgar, would you like to provide the indicated motion to receive the presentation? Sure. Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Is there any objection? There being none, that's carried. Thanks, everybody. I'd like your response and your consideration of my draft mayoral direction. that the Budget Committee endorse or recommend changes to the draft mayoral direction to staff for the 3.5%, and that the Budget Committee endorse Councilors Adams and McNeese for appointment as chair and vice chair, or recommend others, and that the Budget Committee endorse or recommend changes to the draft schedule as you've just seen. Would anybody like to propose any changes? Would anybody like to propose to endorse these measures? Councilor Longo, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, I see no objection, unless Councilor Elgar, your electronic hand. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your unanimous endorsement of that. That ends our work for this evening, and as you see, we have some fairly serious work ahead of us in order to wrestle these numbers down. I will say that I read an interesting article in the financial papers a couple of days ago. Economists are saying in the United States to those members of the administration who are saying, see, there's no inflation from tariffs. The economists are answering back with a bit of a side eye, saying, oh, this is a supply chain issue. Wait 6 months and you'll see a lot of inflation. So it may well turn out that we may be able to, not only, as we're very proud of doing, come in with a lower tax increase than any of our neighbors, but maybe even get under inflation, depending on where this follow the bouncing ball game of tariffs or not tariffs goes. That ends our work. Thanks very much. It's great working with you, and I look forward to the next time. Bye-bye.